Introduction to Rainwater Systems. At the end of this part of the session, I want you all to be able to state the legislation and standards that cover rainwater and drainage systems. Describe how to joint the different materials used in rainwater systems. And recognise various gutter shapes and fittings and describe some of the ways they might affect the capacity of the system. What is the purpose of gutter? Why should we install it? Well, the reason for that is that if we don't, we'd see a lot of ground erosion around the house as a result of the water streaming from the roof, which could then, would erode the ground and could lead to damage to the foundations. The same is true if we don't terminate our rainwater pipes correctly. So the legislation and standards that cover rainwater are the same ones that cover our drainage systems as well. Building Regulations Part H and BSEN 12056, so British standards. So the piece of legislation, the law that covers rainwater and drainage systems is the Building Regulations Part H, and the British standard for it, it's actually a combined British and European standard, is BSEN 12056. Part 3 specific to roof drainage, if you're interested. It's also worth making sure that we follow the manufacturer's instructions, again, for any sort of gutter or rainwater we install, including obviously for any tools or equipment we might use as well, particularly given that a lot of the work is at height. And when you're working on guttering systems, it's almost certain you're going to be working up at roof level for a large proportion of the job. So what are the hazards? Well, the main hazard is working at height, and obviously you need to make sure as far as possible you can ensure your own safety and the safety of the people you're working with. And the best way to do that is by using an appropriate scaffold. You can actually get some of these quick fit sort of scaffolds, easy deck scaffolds, which can be put up quite quickly, and will give you a good platform to work from if you're installing gutters and rainwaters. Make sure if you use a ladder to access the scaffold, it should project at least 1 metre past the access point to make it easier to alight onto the platform. If you ever did use a ladder to work on guttering, you should only ever do this for very short periods of time. It recommends less than 30 minutes. One example might be if you went up there to fix a leak, for example, then you would use a standoff bracket. You can see on this picture here, this bracket connected to the ladder there is pushing the ladder out from the wall. It means that the ladder isn't resting on what you're going to be working on, the gutter, for example, so it's less chance of it sort of slipping, and it also means you don't have to lean back potentially to, if it was resting against the wall, to do whatever you needed to do with the gutter. So a standoff bracket would be recommended if you ever did use a ladder to access guttering. Whatever you use to access, make sure you rope off the area below where you're working, put out notices to make sure that people don't accidentally walk underneath where you're working and get clobbered, essentially. Make sure you wear appropriate PPE. Obviously, if you're working at height, that could potentially be a harness. Be recommended to wear a hard hat with a chin strap as well if you're working at height. So if you accidentally did fall, and your hat wouldn't fly off. And if you are working on existing rainwater or drainage systems, it's recommended that you use waterproof gloves, normally sort of rubber gloves, something like that, because there is a risk of Veals disease, hepatitis and dermatitis from the contents of the pipework, particularly from drainage systems, but also from existing rainwater systems as well. There's sort of potentially going to be different sort of issues as a result of maybe bird droppings or whatever's kind of ended up in the in the gutters. The bird droppings are particularly an issue because they can contain parasites which could cause damage to your lungs. So it's actually recommended to wear a dust mask as well if you're ever sort of clearing out old gutters. So wear waterproof gloves and a dust mask if cleaning out old gutters, and waterproof gloves and other appropriate protection if you're working on a drainage system. Excuse me. Okay, traditionally we would have used cast iron for gutter and rainwater pipes, downpipes. Not so much these days. It's quite difficult to work with. It's quite heavy, difficult to move, quite expensive, and much more time consuming to joint. You actually joint it using putty normally, so putty and a nut and a bolt, and you'd sort of then tighten that up and it would make a watertight seal. But it's not as time efficient as using, for example, plastic, which is what's used most commonly these days, PVC, UPVC plastic. Though sometimes you might install aluminium gutters. I don't think I've ever come across them myself, but it is something that's worth being aware of. Plastic gutters are jointed using plastic fittings. They've got rubbers in them which keep it watertight, unlike the sort of having to add putty with the cast iron. And they're quite easy to joint. You know, you literally just clip it over and hook it over the gutter. Aluminium gutters can differ depending on the make. They can be jointed more like plastic gutters, but they can also potentially have the nut and bolt like cast iron as well, depending on the manufacturer. And we can cut any of these materials with a hacksaw. But the good thing about plastic gutters, it can also be easily cut with a handsaw, like a wood saw. Gives you a nice straight cut fairly quickly. We can also have intermediate joints which can joint between the different materials and also the different profiles. We're going to look at the different profiles in a second. We can see here on the left we have an OG ornamental gutter style cast iron connection on one side going to what looks like a half round plastic connection on the other. And these are useful, for example, if your neighbour's got a different gutter material or a different gutter profile, you might need to use one of these at the joint of the property to change between one profile and the other. You can see on here we've got a deep flow on one side and a square section on the other. So the different gutter profiles are half round. So half round gutter probably carries the least amount of water, but it's one of the most commonly fitted ones. OG, it's spelled OGEE, but it actually originally was short for ornamental gutter. It was literally OG, ornamental gutter, but it's then now just known as OG. Square line, as you can see, isn't actually square, it's more angular, but it's described as square gutter, even though it's not square. Okay, worth being aware of that. And deep flow gutter is like half round, just deeper. Essentially, it's more like half of an oval rather than half a circle, if that makes sense. And this can carry quite a lot of water in it. More commonly fitted these days. So gutter and downpipe fittings, we're going to very briefly look at this. You can actually get internal and external stop ends. This is an external stop end that would be clipped over a piece of gutter, but you can also get internal stop ends which can be clipped directly into a fitting. The running outlet, and that's where the water would run out of the gutter into the downpipes. We also have union connection, angles. This is a 90-degree angle, but you can get different sort of angles. And fascia brackets. There's different types of clips, essentially gutter clips. This is the fascia bracket is just one of them, and we're going to look at those a bit later on. When it comes to the downpipe, you've got the offset bends, which are used to change the direction of the downpipe, which can go into sockets. You can use sockets to connect pipes or to connect the offset into as well as having clips as well. Interestingly, you can see here that the shoe and the offset bend look quite similar, and it's worth being aware that they are different and they're used for different purposes, and we're going to briefly look at that as we go through. So just worth noting, different components can affect capacity. If you fit a lot of angles, what this can do and what this will do is it will slow down the flow of water, slow down how quickly the water can flow from the roof, which essentially reduces the effective roof area that the system can serve. And also, I mean, you are actually allowed, according to the regulations, to install guttering level. Not most people wouldn't normally do that. We normally do it at a very, very slight fall towards the outlet of about like 1 millimetre for every 600 millimetres you go horizontally. If you install it level, again, it slows down how quickly the water can flow out the system and reduces the effective area, the effective capacity of the system, essentially. Yeah, just like we're talking about here. So if you lay it to the recommended flow of 1 in 600, it speeds up draining slightly and increases the roof area it can serve. Also fitting more downpipes, so you'd have this one kind of running slightly out towards the side, this one running slightly out towards that side. You've got 2 downpipes there, so each is serving half of the roof. It means that you can, it will be able to sort of take more water away. Also, interestingly, actually, if you put the downpipe at the centre of a run rather than the far end of the run, it actually also increases the sort of effective roof area it can serve, the effective capacity, essentially, is because the water is going to have to travel a shorter distance before it can actually go out through the downpipe. Okay, so connecting the downpipe to the gutter, do that using a running outlet, and then from the running outlet it would be connected into the offset bends. But again, like I said earlier, it looks very similar to the shoe, so we need to be aware that the downpipe offset bend has got a sort of spigot coming out here, whereas the shoe doesn't, which we're going to look at sort of at the end of this session. So different shapes and sizes you can have for downpipes. One is a round section or a square section. Okay, and again, you can have adapters between them if required. Round downpipes normally 68mm, square downpipes slightly smaller, it's 65mm. You can connect downpipes together either by using a branch like the one shown on the left here, or by connecting them both into a hopper head. And finally, this is the shoe. You can see shoes potentially would be fitted at the bottom of a downpipe, normally just over a grating, but sometimes they can go out onto a surface, for example, which would then potentially be flowing out towards another drain, but it's preferable to have it discharging out over a gully. Or you can have it going straight into the underground drainage using an appropriate adapter like you can see on the left here. Okie dokie, that is the end of sort of part 1, and it's time for your task.